welcome to the Montana Office of Public Instruction Indian Education for All webinar series, Unpacking the Essential Understandings Regarding Montana Indians. This is our series 2. It is not simply a repeat, it is the new improved version from our very first go around last fall. My name is Jennifer Statham and I am an Indian Education for All implementation specialist, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm grateful to be sitting here resting my feet on the lands used for millennia by the Salish, Blackfeet, Kootenai, and many other tribal nations. We are so glad that you've joined us this evening. We have an incredible presentation for you. First, as this is a virtual format, I'd like to share a few instructions and Zoom tricks with you. We are recording this meeting for future use, so all will be on mute except speakers, and only the current speaker will appear on your screen. Please use the chat feature throughout the presentation should you want to ask a question, share an aha moment, wish to share a relevant resource, or participate in responding to questions brought forth in the presentation. Also in the chat, there will be important links for renewal units. I'll put those links throughout the webinar, so keep checking chat if you think you've missed something. And there will also be the link for the resources for the Google Drive folder. All of the resources mentioned in the webinar will be on that resource sheet. The renewal sign-in attendance, please put your full name in that as well as in the chat, just so we can double check it in case anything goes wrong with the Google Drive. And we will make sure to get you your renewal units for this evening. There's also, for the renewal units, there's a post-webinar survey, the link for which will be in the chat near the close of the webinar. So just like if you were attending something in person, you would fill out the survey after or near the end of the workshop. So that will be opened up near the end of the workshop. And the survey is only available for 24 hours. So make sure that you do complete that as soon as possible if you would like to receive those renewal units. Also, there will be a web page, and again, at the right time, I will put the address in the chat box, but it will be for menti.com, and there will be a meeting code that you'll need to enter, and we're going to do a really fun word cloud activity. We're actually doing 2 word cloud activities this evening, so make sure to keep that page open for this second slide. We are very excited to launch this new and improved webinar series 2, focused on the essential understandings regarding Montana Indians. The essential understandings serve as the foundation for all of the work we do in Indian education. One of the most valuable aspects of the essential understandings is the emphasis of the Native perspective. It is especially important in these times as educators to support the inclusion and acceptance of multiple points of view. The more perspectives that are brought to the table and valued, the more we can see the opportunities where we can challenge ways that institutionalized racism restricts equitable education for all. The essential understandings came about several years ago after Indian Education for All became law. Members from every tribe represented in Montana came together and developed this list of important concepts that provide a focus for understanding more about each unique culture represented. This has been a powerful document and has been a catalyst for other entities to develop essential understandings. The Indian Education team has even had opportunities to consult with other states, such as South Dakota and Oregon, and institutions such as the Smithsonian's Museum of the American Indian, as they have developed their own essential understandings. A few years ago, after consideration of teacher feedback, we took the opportunity to revise the original document and expand each understanding in order to make them more accessible for teachers and students. However, each of the understandings is packed full with knowledge, information, stories, and perspectives. We hope that through this series and so watch the OPI Indian Education for All webpage for upcoming professional development. We are also offering this time a deeper dive series. So the week following each of our Unpacking the Essential Understandings webinar series, which you are a part of this evening, next Wednesday, we will start the deeper dive series, and we will go into curriculum examples and sharing of resources that pertain per understanding that was covered the week before. We do highly recommend that you attend the live sessions prior to enrolling in the deeper dive sessions so that your background knowledge is at about the same level, so we can dive really deeply into those things. I would like to now introduce our presenters, Miranda Murray and Jordan Langford Forster. Jordan, also named Bright Trail Woman, is Anin and Anishinaabe, and Miranda is a descendant of the Yankton Sioux tribe of Fort Peck. Jordan and Miranda are both Indian Education for All instructional coaches in their school district. They are also the lead facilitators of Bright Trail Education, an education consulting company that provides culturally competent education strategies, equity training, and dropout prevention plans that serve American Indian communities. Both facilitators have presented nationwide in their efforts to spread awareness and support concerning Indian Education for All and equity in the classroom. Welcome, Miranda and Jordan. We are delighted to have you with us this evening.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's really nice to have you all here tonight. We're really excited for everyone to be joining us. Like Jennifer stated, I am Miranda Murray, and I am one of the lead facilitators for Bright Trail Education.
Hi, I'm Jordan Langford, Bright Trail Woman. We are so excited to be here, and we just want to thank OPI for their partnership and allowing us to do this. As instructional coaches for our district, we help other educators implement Indian Education for All in all of their content and curriculum. We love lessons for IFA, but we really want to reiterate that it's important to just not consolidate your IFA into one single lesson. We want to create the capacity for these lessons to extend throughout the year. We want these things to continue into conversations that you're always having with your children, that you are always making meaningful and relevant to them. There are a lot of lessons, but there's a lot of conversations. Jennifer mentioned those key concepts that were developed, and those are a great way to start conversations with your students. So we're going to take you through some activities today. The activities that we share with you today are not just for you, but they can also be applicable in your classroom, and you can use it in a way that makes sense for you and your students. So the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to begin an exploring bias activity. You can do this just on a scratch piece of paper at home. We are not going to ask you to share out your answers, so there's no need to feel panicked or shamed. We're not here to shame anybody. The fact that you guys are attending this is so appreciated. We are just going to ask you to respond to a phrase that I will say shortly. So you're going to write down the first things that you think of when I say the phrase. It can be words that you associate with the phrase. It could be pictures, anything that comes to mind when I say the following phrase. All right, here we go. What are the first things you think of when you hear the phrase Native American? It can be words you associate with it. Again, it could be pictures. It could be word phrases. What are the first things that come to mind when you hear the phrase Native American? And again, you can just do this at home on a scratch piece of paper, and we won't be asking you to share out your answers. We'll give you a couple moments to do that. First things that come to mind when you hear the phrase Native American. Okay, so the reason that we open up this way is because Essential Understanding 1 and 2 really have a lot to do with potential biases or biases that you might have. This allows educators to examine what they think might be true about American Indians if you have no other content knowledge, and that's okay. We're going to also discuss where these biases might come from. Also, biases aren't always a bad thing. I know that a lot of times that it comes with a connotation of something really negative. You could have positive bias about something as well, and we're going to explore that. And we'll revisit this activity throughout the night as well. So let's jump into Essential Understanding 1. There is a great diversity among the 12 sovereign tribes of Montana in their languages, cultures, histories, and governments. Each tribe has a distinct and unique cultural heritage that contributes to modern Montana. So we're going to give you guys a couple of moments to break this down. What words stand out to you? And then we'll debrief and share those. But for now, I want you guys just to examine Essential Understanding 1, and we are going to have you share out the words or word phrases into a Menti cloud.
So Jennifer will pull up that information and give some directions in your chat. And that is going to be something you can do from your computer or phone, however you're joining us.
Okay, I think we have all the right buttons pushed. All right, you should be able to see a screen that says, what words do you notice, in a second here. And you'll want to go to www.menti.com. This is also in the chat. And use the code 5016056 to enter the words that stand out to you in Essential Understanding number 1.
I have, for your convenience, also copy and pasted the Essential Understanding 1 to the chat so that you can go back and reference that phrasing and those words that you wanted to share in your contribution.
Here they come. I love it. So just like any word cloud activity, the more frequency a word is entered, the larger that it is. And again, it's menti.com, www.menti.com, and use the code 5016056 to get to this screen and enter up to 3 words that you notice about Essential Understanding number 1. We just had some folks join us from the waiting room. And if you are seeing the screen, we are looking at what words we notice from Essential Understanding number 1. If you go to the chat, that should be there. However, I'm not sure if you join Zoom now that you will be able to see the whole chat. But anyhow, this is menti.com. And there is a code at the top, 5016056, if you would like to participate in this exercise. And while we are waiting for the responses, maybe Miranda, you can throw up the Essential Understandings, Essential Understanding number 1 again for those folks that just joined us. We just had a whole slew of folks jump in.
Sure thing. So I just entered that into the chat. We're looking at words that stand out to you as being something that you would want to focus on or that are important to you. You can find those in the chat for Essential Understanding number 1.
And also, if you just joined us, as soon as I get done sharing my screen here, I will come back to the chat and I will be entering a link for you to sign in for the renewal units. And if you could also enter your name in the chat, just so we have double records in case anything happens to the Google form for your renewal units. And welcome to all of you who have just joined us.
I forgot to also mention in terms of accessibility, if this is not something you are able to participate in from whatever device you are using, you're certainly welcome to put those words that you want to contribute in the chat and we can see those there as well.
Okay, so we'll just give you a couple more moments to respond. Thank you to everyone who is participating and responding either in the chat or on Menti.
And again, keep this tab open when we move on from the screen. Oh, really cool thing. While you are moving on to your next activity, I will be saving these as PDFs, and they will be available in the participant resource folder as a teaching tool if should you so choose to use it. And again, all of the links that we talk about, I will be putting into the chat periodically throughout the renewal units, the survey. For those of you who did join us late, there is going to be a feedback survey that is available for 24 hours. It is not open until about the last 10 minutes, just so we can make sure that people attend the whole webinar.
Thanks, Jennifer. The other thing I'd like to mention, and as we kind of go through these Essential Understanding webinars, and I hope that you are able to join us for all of those, is that all of the activities that we do with you as teachers are certainly activities you can take and do with your students. So you could certainly access Menti and set that up. It's a free resource, and utilize this on your own time.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. You guys nailed it. I guess I shouldn't say that. There's no right or wrong answer, but the whole point of the webinar series and why it's called Unpacking the Essential Understandings is that the essential understandings are meant to help educators as kind of like a beginning of, where can we start? The basics, where can we start? But at times it's difficult because they're so dense with verbiage and there's a lot of messages going on at one time. So the question is, how do we break this down for our students in a meaningful way for them? And this is a very applicable means to do so with your students as well, is what is the message here? And you guys pointed out diversity, and that's true. Essential Understanding 1 is really conveying the diversity among tribes. These are the words that we picked out. There's no right or wrong answer, but how do we break this message down for students? And it could be a simple conversation with a kindergarten class is, what does diversity mean? It means different. In comparison, tribes differ in similar ways to countries around the world. So if you were to enter a different tribe, it would literally be like going to a different country. They differ in language, culture, histories, governments, locations, food, clothing, all of these things. And so, also too, you could ask your students, if you traveled somewhere, even to a different state in the United States, how would that look like? There would be differences in dialect, differences in culture, costumes, and give examples of those. This is really, really easily applicable to all grade levels. I'm going to say this throughout the webinar series, so forgive me, but I think a lot of times too, educators have a tendency to cut themselves off at the knees a little bit. And what I mean by that is they're always looking at grade level standards and things like that. I teach high school students, and what I will tell you about that is if it's new information for them, if it's information they've never heard before, then it's grade level and they need to hear this message. And you can choose to do that however makes sense in your classroom.
Yeah, that's a great thing to point out, because the way that we want to think about these essential understandings is guidelines as to how you can start infusing IFA into your classroom in a manageable way. And when we look at pulling apart the language that are in these essential understandings, it's a really good practice for us as educators, but it's a good practice for our students as well, because what we want them to become familiar with is this language, these kinds of words that they're going to be exposed to the more you are able to infuse IFA into your classroom. Things like diversity and language and culture. Some of these concepts are foreign or not well understood by our students, even sometimes by ourselves. And as we dive deeper into these essential understandings through this webinar series, through our deeper dive series, you'll find that the repetition in language is a really important part. We know that that works for kids. We know that that's important to our learning. And so we really want to be thinking about what ways can I be intentional about including this language so that it's not the first time that they're hearing it. So it's a part of our daily conversations, even when we're not focusing on IFA. It's good ways to draw comparisons to our other curriculum and therefore infusing that IFA into our classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I do with my students as well is after we get this important vocabulary down and we decide what the message is, you can do things like flashcards. I have a word wall in my room. When I get a couple of extra minutes in between the other goings on, I just point at the word wall and we're repeating and we're talking about what does diversity mean? What does language mean? What does distinct and unique mean? All of these things. And that's a way to extend the conversation, not just for one day, but throughout the school year. Just as Miranda was saying, revisit that content and material and really allowing students to not just memorize it, but really learn what that means in an intentional way.
Yeah. The images you're seeing on the side here are a good visual representation of diversity among tribes. We're going to be able to incorporate through some books that we'll share with you later and through lesson plans, this idea that tribes, based on their locations and resources, had different things available to them, and therefore were diverse in the way that they lived and live today. So when we look at housing, for example, this is a really easy way to demonstrate diversity for all grade levels. And so this image pairs nicely with essential understanding number 1.
Right. So we're going to jump into our next activity and revisiting the first activity we did concerning exploring our bias. A lot of times what we think is true comes from our exposure to imagery. If you are unable to have access to primary documents or certain cultures and experiences, a lot of times we get our imagery from things like movies, books, the news, and our friend, the Google machine, because we carry it around with us. It's in our pocket. We can look something up 24/7. So we're going to take you through an exercise that we do with our staff and with our students and explore the imagery that we're exposed to and see if that might have affected our bias or those things that you wrote down when you hear the phrase Native American. So we're going to go to a Google search that I did a couple weeks ago. It wasn't that long ago. And we're going to look at different racial groups and how their images are projected when you do a Google image search. So we are pretending that we don't know anything about these groups of people, and we're going to explore the images that stand out to you with these specific groups of people, what emotions might be conveyed, and what is the message you might get if you are Google image searching these people for the first time. And we will begin that now. And we'll give you a couple moments to reflect on each one of these. You can reflect at home. We would really appreciate it if you also reflected in the chat so we can talk to you guys and see what's going on. So we're going to begin that now. So the first Google image search is white Americans. So again, what stands out to you in these images? Are any emotions conveyed? What message might you get about this group if you are Googling them for the first time? If you're just going to the internet to find more information about the people, don't worry about the captions that are associated with them, just look at the images.
Thank you to those that are willing and able to participate in the chat. As we move forward throughout these, you'll find that the interaction that you guys are going to be able to have with each other is also a very powerful tool in learning more about what we're talking about.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next Google image search. And that is African Americans, or Black Americans. So again, what stands out to you, any emotions conveyed, what message might you get if you are Google image searching this group of people for the first time? Okay, a couple more moments to respond. Okay, the next group in my Google image search is Hispanic Americans. So again, what stands out to you, any emotions conveyed, and what message may you get about this group if you are Googling them for the first time? If you're just going to the internet to find out more information about them, what messages might you get from these images? All right. The next group that we are going to Google image search, or that I Google image search, is Asian Americans. What stands out to you? Any emotions conveyed? What message may you get about this group if you are Googling them for the first time, if you're just trying to find out more information about this group of people? Okay, we have one more group to look at. The final group that we are going to observe is Native Americans. So these are the first images that popped up when I Google image searched Native Americans. What stands out to you? Are any emotions conveyed? And what message may you get if you are Google searching this group of people for the first time? And also in the chat, if you could also reflect on the differences we see when we Google image search this group of people compared to the other racial groups we Google image searched. When I Google searched Indigenous Americans, the only colored photo was taken out and they were all black and white. Someone just asked that in the chat. They asked what happens if you Google search Indigenous Americans. So it actually gets a little worse.
It's also sometimes dependent on what's going on in the news for all of the groups as we're going through. If you're doing this live, for example, with students or coworkers.
This group of people primarily stays the same though. So yeah, we're getting a lot of comments that these photos are historical. There's not modern, contemporary images. And how it reflects to our bias activity that we did before when I asked you what are the first things that you think of when you hear the phrase Native American. When we do this with students or we do this with staff members that were instructional coaching, they will write things like feathers, teepees, regalia, braids, long hair. And that's really reflective of the images that we're exposed to. So when we're looking at images or images that we're sharing with our children, it's really important that we be intentional that these are contemporary images that we're sharing with our children, because if you don't know about this group of people, it's an accurate statement to assume that they might no longer exist. You're only seeing historical photos of them. They might have only existed in the past. They don't exist today. In Montana, we're really lucky with our Constitution and with these 7 essential understandings, because Indian education for all doesn't exist in a lot of the other states in our country today. And so we're very lucky that we have this intent and we have practices in place to make sure that we're implementing it. But it really starts with our children and the images that they're exposed to.
Some other ways we might see that imagery being exemplified in the way our kids are seeing or our students are seeing themselves or groups that maybe they're not a part of is through TV and television. Sometimes we talk about the fact that a lot of our community is low income, and therefore they might not purchase cable, for example. And here in Great Falls, which is where we are located, one of the free channels is Grit TV, which shows Western movies all day long. And so they're still, even if they're not at an age where they're going to be looking at Google image search or whatever for this particular activity, they still might be exposed to those ideas of historical versus contemporary.
Right. And this affects our kids as well. And kind of this rhetoric of what you have to look like if you are an American Indian person or a Native American person, it really affects our children, because we just need to be more intentional about how we speak. A lot of times our kids say that they're Native and they get the response of, well, you don't look like you're Native, or how Native are you? And that's a reflection of imagery and what other people have been exposed to. If I wear a feather to school, or if I don't wear a feather to school, that doesn't reflect who I am. It doesn't reflect who my family is, where I come from. But it affects our children because we have this bias and this idea of what it means to be Native. And it means a lot of times to a lot of people that you have to look a certain way. And that's not true. Our children need to know that Native Americans exist outside of these photos, and they exist outside of feathers, and they exist outside of teepees and tomahawks.
I really am enjoying some conversation happening in the chat. I appreciate people that are sharing their ideas and ways that you can utilize this exercise. People are noting that depending on the way you're searching, the language you're searching, like we just talked about a little bit ago, language is super important. You are going to get different results. And I also like looking at the idea of searching for specific tribes, seeing what does that look like? Are there certain tribes that are represented more heavily in contemporary issues and versus historical issues? It's still a way to be talking about to our students media literacy. What are we looking at? What does this mean? And what should we be thinking about when we're viewing images for the first time.
Absolutely. And this also comes up too with how we might set up our classrooms. What posters are we sharing? What messages or images are we sharing around Thanksgiving time? We'll talk about that throughout our EUs. But I really appreciate everyone participating in this in your comments. It really means a lot. We learn. We're not here to teach you guys everything about everything, because we don't know everything about everything, but we really like it when our participants are able to get involved in the chat, because you guys really have a lot to say, and we really appreciate the commentary and the conversation that results in that. So next activity, I'm going to give you a couple of moments to reflect on this quote. They want our culture, but not our struggle. So examine what the message is, and also respond in the chat what this means to you. They want our culture, but not our struggle.
These responses are really powerful. There's a lot of deep thinking going on. Again, the answering in chat, we're reading all of these. We may not be, reading them all out loud, but we are reading all of them. And it is really powerful. Thank you so much for contributing.
Yeah, I was just thinking when participants who aren't able to make it to the live session go back and watch these, they're going to see Jordan and I, like, in the video reading the comments, because we really do appreciate that participation, and we really go back and look through the comments that we didn't get to read, because sometimes they come through really quickly, but we appreciate, there's been a lot of really excellent responses so far, so thank you for doing that.
They want our culture, but not our struggle. I would say multiple races deal with this message, and it's popular to incorporate pieces of different dress or cultures into your own understanding, and in a way that benefits you. We see this a lot with sports teams, especially. They use a lot of native imagery in their mascots. They also use a lot of native imagery with their symbols, or symbols that people associate with American Indian people. I would invite you guys also, as an extended exercise, is to take a look at a couple of those symbols or mascots, and reflect on how they perpetuate those stereotypes, and they themselves keep American Indian people in the past, just like those pictures we just saw perpetuate the idea of warlike society. Especially around Halloween time, people dress up as American Indians. And really what we're dealing with, a lot of you guys mentioned it, it's cultural appropriation, or adopting or co-opting markers associated with a group in a way that benefits you. And so we see the headdresses, we see the costuming, the feathers and stuff. And those people have a privilege, and the privilege doesn't have anything to do with their race. Their privilege is that at the end of the day, when they go home at night or they leave the music festivals that they wear the headdresses to, they have the ability to take their Indianness off. And the true American Indian people don't have that privilege. So when you have the ability to take your Indianness off, you might not have to deal with the other struggles. So you might not get followed around a store because someone thinks you're going to steal. You might not know anybody associated with the missing and murdered Indigenous people crisis that we've been dealing with for 500 years. You appropriate, or you use the cool or tough parts for your own benefit, and you're able to, at the end of the day, take that off and return to your regular living situation. And it's unfortunate that those things even happen, but it's really a conversation with our kids too about what it means to appropriate culture. I think it's very meaningful when children are entered in this conversation too. We have a comment about the tomahawk chop during the Super Bowl, something that was frustrating for us during the season of the NFL. Is their slogan, or their I guess mantra this year, is to end racism. And so they have end racism, and it takes all of us written down in the end zones while they're still doing the tomahawk chop at these games.
Another great question in the comment is asking the difference between wearing a headdress and purchasing, let's say, like earrings from someone selling them. That's a great question to clarify. So when we think about a headdress, we think about the honor that is bestowed upon the person who has earned that. And the language I'm using there is earned, because not everyone is entitled to wear a headdress or have that experience or go through those ceremonies. It is certainly something that has been earned through many acts, and is different for each tribe that has something like that. Not every tribe has headdresses. They might have other versions of that kind of honor. But when we think about purchasing work from a Native American person, maybe they're selling jewelry or beaded earrings, we're supporting that person, and they're sharing their culture in that way. And there's a transaction happening there. It's a lot different. Later on in the series, we'll be able to talk more about profit and loss and things like that. But there is a big difference between at the $50,000 bar in on your way to Idaho. You can purchase headdresses there, and those companies are obviously not native made, and those are not authentic. When you're purchasing and making a transaction and supporting a Native American person, when they're sharing their craft and sharing their work with you, that is a different kind of transaction. Thank you for asking that question. That's really great.
There's a lot of capital to be gained in cultural appropriation. And for the most part, it doesn't benefit Native people or Native communities who have made these things with intentionality. We fully support you supporting Native people who have put a lot of work into their craft and intention and meaning behind it. That's great. But again, it's looking at that capital. Who's benefiting from this purchase? Is it this multi-million-dollar NFL team, or is it a young woman or lady or man who worked really, really hard at mastering their craft of beadwork? So the other problem too with appropriation is it is still perpetuating these stereotypes of what all natives looked like, what you should look like if you're claiming that you're Native. And it perpetuates the idea that not only all tribes are the same, but all individuals were the same too. They all spoke the same. They all had tomahawks. They all loved war. And so at this time, we are going to actually, Jennifer, are you ready for our poll?
No.
Okay, that's okay.
So sorry.
Let's get into Essential Understanding 2, and we'll do the same Menti word cloud with Essential Understanding 2.
Let me bring up my screen for you. So Essential Understanding number 2, maybe. There we go. It says, just as there is great diversity among tribal nations, there is great diversity among individual American Indians as identity is developed, defined, and redefined by entities, organizations, and people. There is no generic American Indian. So just like we did before, Jennifer will be sharing the Menti instructions for looking through Essential Understanding number 2. You can keep open that last tab that you were doing and enter them in the same place. I will stop sharing my screen so she can share hers. I will also copy and paste the Essential Understanding number 2 into the chat as well, so that you are able to see that and reference it as you are choosing
words that stand out to you.
So for those of you who joined a little bit late, 2 things. One, if you could go to www.menti.com, MENTI.com, and you'll use the code 5016056. You should all see this on your screen right now. And you can answer, what words do you notice in Essential Understanding number 2? If for some reason you are not able to access this Menti page, please put your responses in chat, because if you can't tell, we take a close look at what's in chat. Also, if you have joined us, as soon as I have a screen available, I will come back to chat and I will enter all of the information for the sign-in sheet. Several of you joined us a little bit later, so I want to make sure you get signed in, but also do please put your name, your full name in the chat so that we can cross-reference with the Google Doc. And yes, we're glad that you are all here. And also for those of us who might have joined late, the menti.com, as soon as we get done watching the responses and discussing the responses, I will be making a PDF, and that will be available in the participant resource folder, which again, as soon as we return to Miranda and Jordan, I will post all of that in the chat.
So as people are getting the opportunity to enter the words that they think are something to pay attention to, the words that are important to them, we're seeing some things like individual, obviously a big part of this Essential Understanding, especially when we're comparing it to 1 and 2. These go hand in hand with each other. They pair really nicely together, looking at diversity among tribes and diversity among the individual. It's always interesting to us when we're presenting to different groups to see there's always a few words that are pulled out regularly, but it is also interesting to see some of the other words that people pull out as being important to them. So seeing things like no generic, that is a phrase that we also like to pull out, and diversity and identity. Again, if you are unable to access the Menti due to technical difficulties or the device you're using, certainly feel free to enter the words you'd like to share into the chat, and we will look over them there as well. So it looks like we have about a third of the people's responses. We'll give you just a little bit more time if you wanted to enter your response, and then we will continue on through.
Once we switch to, I'll give you a few minutes if you are just getting on to go to www.menti.com and use the code 5016056. And you can also respond. So I'll leave this up for about a minute after I stop sharing the screen.
Thank you. Yeah, these are good resources to utilize in your classroom if you choose to participate using this kind of resource, either going through the essential understandings. That's something we like to do with students. It's certainly a good way to focus your attention on how you want to get through those essential understandings. Those essential understandings are just as important themselves as the way that you are able to incorporate them with other resources.
These are the words that we pulled out for essential understanding too. Again, there's no right or wrong words, but really the message here is diversity among individuals. You guys did a great job with the Menti. So I also really appreciated that a lot of people had entered no generic. And so it can be a conversation with your class by beginning with them with, what does generic mean? Okay, so what does it mean if there's no generic people? And also asking your class, you know, how does the media affect us? Or, hey, have you guys seen images like this? And display a black and white photo and say, have you seen images like this? Both of these individuals are American Indian people. It really creates through the images on Google and, you know, the appropriation of culture, it also creates this, what we call a pan-Indian identity, and portrays all natives as the same. And so these are really great conversations to have with your class. Again, it doesn't have to be an entire lesson. It can just be a conversation, but really getting our students to begin to think about these concepts.
Yeah, one of the things that is really important to Jordan and I, as we're instructional coaching with teachers we work with, staff we work with, is to really kind of pare down the overall task of incorporating IFA into your classroom, because a lot of times it can be really overwhelming to think about teaching a big lesson or a unit and feeling under-equipped to do so, whether that be through your knowledge base or feeling like you don't know what you're talking about, has really been something we encounter that is holding teachers back. So we like to come at it from a little bit different angle, which means that we're infusing IFA into the curriculum we're already teaching. It should be enriching something you're already teaching, and not something that has to take time away and stress you out and get you off track from your curriculum schedule. And it shouldn't be something that is overwhelming. It can be small, everyday conversations that's going to be more impactful to your students than kind of this one and done. I did my IFA lesson for the month or the quarter, for example. So when we're looking at diversity for the individuals, really thinking about how to relate that to students is thinking about how we are different from each other. And so therefore, in groups of people, they are different from each other.
We had a comment in the chat that someone said they liked the word redefined. I do too, because it keeps, the comment was because it keeps American Indian people in the present. And that's very true. Redefined is a very important part of this, because it's reflective of the fact that American Indian people, like all cultures, have the ability to evolve over time. You don't survive for thousands of years without the ability to evolve over time, without the ability of having scientific knowledge of your surrounding and your environment. You you progress. And that's the whole point of tribes, was to have your tribe not only survive, but thrive. And that involves redefining who you are and redefining a lot of things for you. And so I really like that too. I appreciate that comment.
So now I think, Jennifer, we have the poll that you guys can, it should pop up on your screen when Jennifer has the ability to pull that up. So the poll question, this is a question that we get asked as instructional coaches and educators all the time, is what do I call them? What's the right phrase? What's the right word? So some of the choices you have here are Native American, American Indian, First Peoples, Indian, Native, and Indigenous. So again, this is anonymous. This is just something for you to reflect on. And we'll give everyone a little bit of time to put in their answers. If for whatever reason the device that you are on is not allowing you to see the poll, or you can't find that, you certainly can enter your thoughts in the chat.
And if you're not familiar with the poll either, once it's submitted, it doesn't tell everyone who said what. So you guys don't need to panic about that either.
You'll hear Jordan and I talk about that a lot throughout these series. It's really important to us that everyone feels safe and willing to share, because that's where growth and learning happens. And so there is no silly question. All the questions are good questions if they are something you need to know more information about. Just as we're giving some people some time to finish submitting their answers, I saw a question there that asked if someone puts a resource in the chat or a link in the chat that's not Jordan or I as the presenters, how do I find those again? How do I access those again? The resource list that you have in the folder that was shared to you will be updated if there's any resources that are shared during the presentation that aren't already there. So that you will be able to find them. Jennifer is a busy lady, and she does an amazing job catching those up for us and getting all of the relevant and updated information in there for you. So give her just a couple of days and she will magically
she said I will enter them tomorrow.
Oh, nice. She's a quick one. All right.
Oh,
I'll try to enter them tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and wrap up that poll, and you should be able to see the results here shortly. Lots of different answers in there and lots of different choices. I saw some people say, I want to choose more than one, and we completely understand that narrative as well.
Like Miranda was saying, we get asked this question all the time, and it's really a well-intended question. People or educators are never trying to hurt anyone's feelings. This question, however, is kind of a trick question. And what we mean by that is, because there is diversity among individuals, that means that it's up to the individual to choose how they identify and what they're called. Similar to a student in your class whose name might be Catherine, but prefers the name Katie. It's really just up to the individual. And asking that question, what do you prefer that I call you? Because not everyone is going to agree. There's no generic person, and it's up to the individual to decide how they identify.
Yeah, and I think that's a really strong point to put out, is that even within the community, different people are going to have different opinions or preferences. And it's also regional. We get, when we travel around and get to interact with people from outside of Montana, there are certain words that are, certain phrases that are considered taboo, or words that we don't use, where in other places it's kind of more widely accepted. So it's certainly a question to have that conversation with the people you are talking to.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now we are going to look over maybe if my screen advances for you, we're going to look over some resources. And like we said a moment ago, the folder that you had shared to you will be updated constantly with all of the resources that are shared. And so these book titles are in that resource document. So don't feel the need to try and scribble down all of the titles. So we wanted to share with you, and hopefully you find this useful. We want to share with you resources that are specific resources that can be used with the essential understandings that we're talking about in each series. So when we're talking about essential understanding 1 and 2, we're talking about diversity in the tribes and diversity in individuals. That means that when you're finding resources, you're looking for resources that are either tribally specific or are talking about an individual to represent these essential understandings. Those are a great way to vet trustworthy and good resources, because there are a lot of resources out there that aren't great ones to use. Doesn't mean that they aren't conversation starters to be talking about these topics, but we really do want to be thinking about how do the books that I choose, the resources that I choose affect my Native students and their sense of identity, and my non-Native students and their understanding of the world around them, especially here in Montana with our IFA resources. So I'm going to be pulling some books off the shelf behind me as I talk about these, and I'm going to give a little bit of a synopsis of what the books are, a little bit of a way you can use them. But if you are able to join us for the deeper dive next time, we will be featuring some of these resources more in depth with lesson plans that you can use going forward. The other question we get asked a lot, Jordan pointed this out earlier, is talking about grade level. I think for the most part, these are probably technically considered middle school and younger grade level books. But like Jordan said, if it's new information for students, it's on grade level for them. They need to know it. And our high school kids and middle school kids love to be read to. So feel free to take a little kid's book, quote unquote, and share that with your high schoolers. So this book is called Teepees. It is by June Pressler. And this book goes through and talks about teepees, everything you need to know about how they were made, how they were prepared, how they are used contemporarily. And that is a great resource in talking about diversity in tribes, because you can ask the question, do all Native American people live in tribes? Or excuse me, live in teepees? And we get that question a lot. You might get that question. I think we as Montanans get that question when we're traveling.
Does everybody ride a horse where you're from?
Yeah. Do you ride your horse to school in the morning? That's kind of the idea that happens around teepees, is did all Native American people live in teepees? So this is a good resource for kind of building up your background knowledge if you're not familiar with the history, the uses, the making of teepees, and sharing that with your students. We have a great lesson plan to share with you next time concerning homes and where people live. We also have this book up here called Water Protectors. This book just won a pretty big award, and it is tribally specific, and it is talking about the sacredness of water, and it can be used with science lessons, with Earth Day, with just thinking about how do we use water? How do I as an individual need water? There's a lot of great resources. It's really beautifully illustrated, using kind of that watercolor feel, and it's following, I believe it's Ojibwe, and it's following a little girl in her journey to how she understands herself to be a water protector and why water is sacred. Yeah, thank you. I couldn't, off the top of my head, I couldn't think of Caldecott. So first tribal member to receive Caldecott Award. The other book you see on your screen there is called Fry Bread. This is an excellent opportunity in this book to talk about diversity. One of the things that I love about this book is it represents diverse families really well. And we don't often get to see diverse families represented. And when I'm saying diverse families, I mean brothers and sisters that maybe don't look the same, single parent households, multiple parent households. And this book talks about fry bread in a way that has to do with the senses. It acknowledges that it's not a traditional food. That's something that's important to talking about food sovereignty. You could utilize this resource when you're talking about food sovereignty and how fry bread came to be. But it talks about how different tribes feel about their fry bread, if that's something that they use or eat, and how individuals feel about fry bread.
Yeah, so a great way to introduce this concept to your class is you could ask a simple question: is fry bread a traditional food? Right? Anything that gets them thinking, and then explain to them why it's not, and also share the material. Also, this is really funny. Sorry. We put these books behind us so you guys would think that we're smart and prestigious. We didn't think about the logistics of what it would look like to get them off the shelf.
Yeah.
So thanks for bearing with us for that.
Just realized that's kind of awkward looking. We'll have them in front of us for next time. The other book that I'd like to share is called Bull Trout's Gift. This is from the Salish Kootenai Press. And the story is it's a longer story. This is something that takes a while to read. But this book is great to utilize with science. We have it as part of one of our required lessons for science here in our school district with our 5th graders. And it's talking about how to be excellent stewards of the land, taking care of the water and the land around us. And it talks about how bull trout are an important part of that. So this is a book that follows contemporarily a class on their field trip. And then in the middle of that is a traditional story. So you're seeing that traditional story being shared contemporarily. And I really enjoy the way this book is written, and students really enjoy it. The illustrations, again, are beautiful. It's written really well. And there are resources, as I'm sure Jennifer will share and that we have linked in the resource file for these stories. The last one we have here is In the Footsteps of Crazy Horse. This is another example of thinking about tribal specificity and individual diversity, because this story follows the life of Crazy Horse, but from a different perspective. It's a boy and his grandfather, and they take a road trip over the summer and visit major points around Montana and Wyoming in Crazy Horse's life. And so it goes back and forth between the contemporary relationship between grandfather and grandson, and talking about Crazy Horse and his life and what that looked like. So excellent book resources to use. I look forward to sharing with you more in depth about some of those lesson plans that can be utilized with these kinds of books.
Yeah, and if you guys haven't gotten a chance yet, I would really recommend looking at those key concepts that have been added to the essential understandings, because if you're panicked that I don't know the answer, most of the answers are found in those key concepts and a little bit more explanation, and you can just rephrase it. I always Jedi mind trick my students, like, I already know the answer, but did all American Indian people strictly hunt bison and that was it? Because I know the answer. And then they're like, oh, and it just gets the conversation started if you rephrase it as a question. These concepts can be naturally infused throughout the year. Anytime that you're having a conversation with your class about geography, resources, the environment, climate, geology, topography, animals in the area, these can always be naturally infused. What we're going to do now is we are going to take you to the OPI website, just to familiarize you, where you can find additional resources too outside of the resource folder, and share with you some contemporary images of American Indian people that you can also use in your school or in your classroom.
Okay, so I'm going to be sharing my screen and taking you from from Google and how we're going to get to the Indian Ed for All resources on OPI's website, because I think that while we're going to receive documents and receive things that have clickable links that go directly to what you need, I find it super important and really powerful for teachers to be able to find where those resources are so they can look for resources themselves that might be something they didn't even think of that they could incorporate into their classroom because they didn't know they were looking for it. So we are going to go to the OPI website. So I just typed in OPI Montana. You could certainly type in the official address. And we are going to, under the educators tab, under teaching and learning, we're going to go down here to Indian education. Let me just move this out of the way so I can see what I'm showing you. And then as you scroll down, there is different parts of the department here at OPI. We're going to go to Indian Education for All. And our friends over at OPI's IFA department do a really great job of sharing different resources all the time. This landing page looks different all the time. There's different video resources depending on what's going on and what's relevant. They do a great job of sharing those. And especially if your school district has remote learning or you're not always face-to-face, sometimes sharing those video resources can be really helpful. So when we go down to classroom resources, you can see down here we have videos too. You can search that as well specifically for videos, but I'm going to take you to classroom resources. And you're going to be able to look at featured resources for remote learning right down here at the bottom. These are different websites and lesson plans that are great for remote learning. I have really been enjoying sending teachers to Native Knowledge 360, which is part of the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian. It has some really beautifully made, in fact, I'll just show you the landing page. Some really beautifully made interactive things for teachers. So for example, if you wanted to look at, let's look at their featured items, we could go to here and look at Native words, Native warriors, and talk more about the role that Native American people have played in the military, which is a big one. And you can go through, and if we view this lesson plan, there's a teacher side and there's a student side. And this is super interactive, great for students, especially if you have access in your classroom to keep your kids socially distant. We're not doing group projects necessarily. If you've got Chrome carts or access to devices, students can go on here and explore and learn at their own pace, or you can share this resource with students in an asynchronous way if they are learning at their own pace through remote learning. And just really well vetted resource. So I'm going to go back where we were. So on the OPI IFA website, where we've gone to classroom resources, you can look through either the featured curriculum if you don't have something in mind, or you can go through to different subject areas and choose something that is more relevant to you. So let's say, for example, I'm looking for something in the social studies category. These are separated by grade level. There is a tab for common resources K through 12. But again, Jordan and I are firm believers, you're going to hear us say this a lot, that if it's new information, they need it. And so if you're finding something in a lower grade that you think might be an interesting way to teach a concept to your older students, go for it, because we can't learn anything that we can't explain really simply. So maybe a more simplified concept way to learn those would be helpful for your students. And then as you are looking through, if you find something you're interested in looking at, it's going to take you to a PDF directly tied to that title with a full lesson plan and resources for using that lesson plan. Let's see, the other resource I wanted to share with you really quickly from OPI's website, especially since we've been talking about diversity among the individual, is the poster series. So OPI in 2008 originally, and then more recently in 2000,
2017.
More recently in 2017 redid this series, and these poster series are featuring contemporary American Indian people from Montana in ways that are good for their communities. So you can click into these posters and look at specific people's posters. There's a larger group poster. These are formatted for you to be able to print, I believe, on legal paper size yourself if you would like to do that. And there are lots of contemporary examples of American Indian people, pictures that are in color, pictures of people that maybe some of those students of yours might even know. So really a cool resource to share contemporary people with our students. The other thing, I'm gonna really quickly, let me grab my link so it can take me directly there. The other two resources I wanted to share, and these are on the OPI website as well, I believe, are videos that are highlighting the different tribes of Montana. So this video does a great job of going through how tribes got their names. This is a resource that you can find on the OPI website as well. Linked into the PowerPoint and linked into the resource list that you will also have. The other video resource that we use pretty often is introducing the First Nations of Montana to the world. This is a really well done video series. There is this series that is about 9 minutes long that kind of briefly goes through each of the tribes of Montana. But each tribe has their own more in-depth video to go along with this series. A great resource for sharing diversity among tribes and really giving students a sense of place and understanding when we're talking about tribes and their traditional lands and where they might be located traditionally in Montana, while also understanding that they could be the friend in your classroom right next to you if you are new to learning that. I believe I have one more link. The other video that can give you a sense of tribal diversity is this video for tribes and how they got their names. It's a great video resource to talk about the names that we call tribes versus the names that they call themselves, which is sometimes an interesting concept for students to understand, thinking about that, you know, we might refer to the Gros-Ventre as the Gros-Ventre, but that is not the name that they call themselves, right? So we're thinking about how different groups refer to one another. And so there are some other lesson plans on the OPI website that also can convey that meaning. All right. So the last thing I want to talk about is just thinking more clearly. Let me switch my screens here for you. Thinking really clearly about vetting resources for your students. So when we're talking about vetting resources, essential understanding number 1 and 2, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, are great ways to think about and understand how we're portraying images to our students. And so when we're thinking about diversity among the individual, diversity among tribes, we really want to make sure that we're understanding that books and media and resources and images that are perpetuating stereotypes are not helpful to our students' learning or to our students' sense of identity if they are a Native student. So we want to be thinking about who wrote the book, who made the resource, where is the image from, who is it intended for, and what makes this person an authority to write about this.
And also who's benefiting from this message.
That's a big part of it, because there are lots of really beautifully published works. That means that they have a lot of money sometimes to make it look really good, and they might not be the right group of people to be writing on that topic, for example. So we really want to be making sure we're thinking about resources and how we can bring those into our classroom. OPI does a really great job of vetting resources, and in their efforts to spread those resources, they send books to your libraries often. So if there is a book mentioned in the lesson plans that you might find on OPI's website, you can probably find some of those books in your library if your librarian has received them from OPI as a gift, so that you have access to those things.
Absolutely. So as we'll share our contact information for you as well. Please feel free to contact us if you have questions or you think of something later. We are going to close with a question though. We would invite you guys to respond in the chat. What is one thing that you thought about tonight that you will try for your class or for your students sometime in the near future? What is something new that you want to try with your students? Might be engaging them in a short conversation. It might be displaying different images in your classroom that they might not have been exposed to before.
It might be engaging in relationships with your students, especially if you have combined groups of people, finding out, including all of your students, finding out their backgrounds and finding out ways they prefer to have that information shared with them. So thinking about asking, you know, what would you prefer when I'm talking a lesson plan that's IFA related? Would you prefer that I refer to them as American Indian or as Indigenous, and kind of building that relationship with those students in your classroom and their sense of identity.
Yeah, and so I will be sharing during our deep dives too. I taught the essential understandings to my students individually, and so we did ways to memorize them, the summary of them, and then how would you explain it to other people. And that's something that I'm going to be sharing in the deep dives too, is how I taught these understandings to my students, and now they can explain it to other people.
Yeah, and when you're looking at the documents that have the essential understandings written, especially with the revised key concepts, they're super handy in kind of giving you a lot of information, but they are well written and they're written at a collegiate level. They mean exactly what they say. There's no minced words there. So that activity where you're going through and pulling out parts of language that make sense to you to share with your students, you can kind of think about that from the flip side and think about what words are my students not going to understand? What words do I need to focus on so that they can understand the meaning behind these essential understandings? And again, if you're thinking about using the essential understandings as the way to start IFA in your classroom, it can be overwhelming to look at those, you know, if you're a first grade teacher, to look at those and be like, how do I even start? How do I simplify this down? And it's really introducing that language, because sometimes I go into classrooms at the elementary level, and let's say I'm going into a 5th grade classroom and we're talking about American Indian people. I have students in there all the time that have never heard language. They don't know what culture means. They don't understand what a reservation is, for example. And so really digging down into finding out where your students are at and where they need to start, and how you can provide that information to them.
Really appreciate these responses.
I also want to thank the non-traditional members of our audience tonight. I know that we're speaking a lot to formatting for teachers and having classrooms. If that is not the case for you, I still appreciate that you're taking these exercises and understandings and shaping them for what works for the role you play in the program you are part of. Again, we want to thank you for participating in the chat. I hope that you are able to join us next week for the deeper dive. We will certainly be talking more specifically about lesson plans, ways and activities you can join for your classroom, and it is applicable to all grade levels. So please join us for that. I'm sure Jennifer has some closing directions for you in the things that you need to do to receive credit. Also for your participation tonight.
Yeah.
Oops, I'm trying to get back on screen here.
Oh,
but anyhow, thank you, Jordan and Miranda. And folks, all of the links are in the Google Drive folder. So please make sure to make note of that Google Drive folder link in your reminder letters each week. The link is also in that reminder link. To email all of you, all of these links is just a little bit beyond capacity at this moment. So please, that's why they're in the chat multiple times, so you can make sure to access them. The renewal uniform is open. Please make sure to complete that as soon as you can. It will close tomorrow. And also in the chat is the registration link for the deeper dives. I really strongly encourage you to join us next week for our first one, where we will dive deeply into Essential Understandings 1 and 2 resources. We're really, really excited. I've gotten a preview of what is going to be presented, and I think it will be highly interactive and highly applicable. I want to go back to the feedback forms. In your feedback forms, please make sure to give us your honest feedback. We look at them every single time. We take your feedback. That's how we got to series 2, is improving on all of the things that were suggested to us. So we just thank you so much for that. Jordan, Miranda, fantastic job. I'm so excited to have had you start us off again, and I really look forward to the rest of the series.
Absolutely.
And all of you, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And I do hope that all of you remain safe and healthy. And if there's anything that we can do, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Jennifer, there was a question in the comment section asking if, even if you're not a classroom teacher working with students, are the deeper dives
open and free? Dive on in.
And
us.
I really believe that even if you're not a classroom teacher and it's not applicable to you in that way, it's the activities and discussions that we will be having will really allow you to unpack the essential understandings even more so.
Yes.
For yourself and for the program you're a part of, you certainly will be able to benefit from those activities. Thank you for asking that, because I'm certain other people probably have that question.
Yes, all of our resources, we'd like to think are great for everyone, because no matter what, you're building your background knowledge and hopefully, you know, able to engage that in some way. And again, you know, so much of this is about embracing multiple perspectives. So great questions. Again, I was able to get all of the resources onto the resource sheet. If you scroll back up, I've added the links again. So make sure to fill out the feedback survey. Make sure to put down, register for the deeper dives and put that down on your calendar for next week. We will be sending out reminder letters the Mondays before, because it will not be every consecutive Wednesday. So make sure to mark the correct dates on your calendar. We are so delighted that you joined us this evening. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.